I don't see how this trade makes the Mariners better this year or next year unless Dom Canzone is like a borderline all-star. I don't really see it.
I think they just feel like they need offense. I don't know if I totally agree with that. I mean, I agree that Paul Sewald, of course, would have continued to help the team. But I think they look at what their needs are now and going forward. And they said, do we have a better chance to develop a bat in the meantime or to find a couple more effective relievers? You look at the pipeline. There are not hitters coming up the ranks outside of Harry Ford in the next couple of years. We talked about that during the draft. This wave of Mariners that's going to be the next group that gets up to the big leagues, they're a long ways out. Again, we've talked about the Cole Youngs, the Colt Emersons, Felnine Celestin, Lazaro Montes, etc. Those guys are a long way away. And the core that's up in the big leagues now, that wave's already here. There's not much in the middle. I think they believe that they have to go get bats that are going to help now and are club controllable and bank on the fact that they can continue to do what they've always done over the last 3 years and just pump out relievers.
And that's going to be get put to the test because outside of Andres Munoz, they have not replicated the success they've had with Paul Sewald. So it just makes you realize how unique of a baseball player Paul Sewald was, from being a minor league free agent in his arm slot, not throwing upper 90s, and still being as effective as ever. So the only other guy in the Jerry Dipoto era who they've managed to get close to the level of Paul Sewald is Andres Munoz, and he throws 101 miles an hour. So that's where you think it's like, okay, that now is time to step up and really put that to the test.
Let's throw Edwin Diaz in there too.
That is true. That he was pretty good. Yeah, but another guy who also throws 101 miles an hour. I'm more thinking sort of in the Sewald role. Because we can say like Munoz and Diaz have absolutely electric stuff and both throw insanely hard, which makes it a little bit easier to develop.
That's true. They have not found many guys like Sewald that throw 90 to 93 and are that effective. I think Penn Murphy was really good last year. I thought he was good this year before he got injured, but he's going to be out a while. I think they've found relievers that have been good. You've seen guys like Topa that just rely on soft contact, and it's worked for him. Gabe Spire gets a ton of guys to chase from the left side. That's worked for him. You've seen some of these young guys in spurts. I would assume that they're going to bank on these guys to continue to develop if they're okay with trading Sewald away. I would think they're going to rely on Isaiah Campbell. We saw him in the 9th on Monday. I think they're going to bring Prelander Baroa back up here in the near future because I think that is a guy they value and think could be a back-end bullpen arm long-term. We'll see if they continue to pitch Devin Sweet at all. I mean, we know that changeup is good when it's on. I think that's what they're going with here. I think they're relying on those guys more. But you are right. In terms of Paul Sewald's production paired with not having triple-digit stuff, they have not found replications of that.
And now is where I think this is a good transition to our next storyline, because I think this kind of bleeds in to that. And we sit here and we think, okay, so thinking in terms of now next season, because we look at what the Mariners did at the deadline and they essentially, they retooled, but they did sell off a major league quality piece in returns for unproven major league quality pieces for the most part for next year. And it raises the question of, if we're thinking about next year now at this trade deadline, because that's what it seems like this deadline was aimed towards, why do we think they did not do anything else?
I don't think the value was there for Teoscar Hernandez. You're talking about getting better for this year and next year, or lack thereof, which you feel like may have happened with this trade because they didn't get big league talent ready now. But what are they going to get for Teoscar that's going to do that in the next year and a half? I think what we saw was the value wasn't there. They might have gotten some minor league bat. Maybe he'd pan out long-term. Maybe he wouldn't. But Teoscar has 2 months left on his contract. He's striking out a ton. He has had a down year. And he's a free agent. I just don't think you were going to get that much back for him. It was going to be nothing like the Sewald return.
They think that the value of him turning down a qualifying offer and getting a draft pick would instead be better. I'm guessing, right? The way I think about this, though, without any other pieces being sold off the roster, they sold Sewald because it was a seller's market. Teams were desperately overpaying for some of these players that we saw go on the deadline. But so the Sewald trade happens, and I then am expecting something else, because if it's really that fruitful for sellers, then they would spring something else. Now, teams don't have to pay for a player significantly underperforming like Teoscar Hernandez, but I did think it was curious that the approach for Paul Sewald was, it's a seller's market, we can get a lot for him, despite what the ramifications might be for our pitching staff next year, opposed to what they believe in for this roster next year. What this tells me is that despite Teoscar Hernandez not getting traded, that they probably do see, as at least right now, they do see guys like Suarez and Ty France on this roster next year. At least right now, this deadline told us that.
Correct. And you didn't even mention the possibility of, does Teoscar Hernandez take a qualifying offer? I think that's possible after the year he just had. If he gets $18 million to stick in Seattle another year, I think him and his agent would consider that. I also think that, again, I just can't stress this enough. I don't think what they were getting back was going to help them win anytime soon for Teoscar Hernandez. I think Teoscar himself could. And it's like we talked about on the last show. I still think Teoscar long-term could turn this thing around and be of significant value to this team. I think he's just having a very down year. I don't see why he can't turn it around next year. I don't see why the Mariners couldn't bring him back on some club-friendly deal or a qualifying offer. I think that between being 3.5 out of the last wild card, 4.5 out of the AL West, and what the market was telling them Teoscar Hernandez was worth, or Ty France was worth, they didn't do it. They said, you know what? We're not just selling off to get prospects. If we think that we are not getting back guys that are going to help us in the near future, then we're not going to just trade these guys away. I know you feel like trading Sewald was essentially giving up this year and next year. Not giving up, but like you're not getting the roster better by acquiring Canzone and Rojas and Bliss. I think the Mariners feel like those guys could help sooner or later, especially with Canzone being on the older side. I don't think what they were getting offered for France or Teoscar or Gino, whoever else, was going to do that.
Well, the thing hinges on Canzone hitting. And if Canzone next year in his first full big league season is a league average hitter, then you aren't getting much better, because you already have those guys in your system. You already have a Cade Marlowe, and you already have other guys, maybe a Zach DeLoach, who you feel like could give you the same level of production. I think the Mariners expect more out of Dom Canzone, but we haven't obviously seen the results yet because he has not played that many major league games. This is sort of a wait and see experiment. I expected more of this deadline to gear up towards next season, at least from the Paul Sewald angle, and I don't think I really saw it. I don't think so, which means this offseason, as we keep saying, is going to be quite important. So I don't know. I was expecting more, I would say. I was expecting more after Sewald.
That's fine, but if you're not getting big league talent back for Teoscar or Ty or Gino, do you really want to trade them?
Probably not. I'm not totally high on Ty France at the moment, but the league also might not have been high on Ty France, so you wouldn't have gotten anything. It just kind of leaves you in this odd spot that, if these guys' value does not go up in the offseason, well, then they're going to be on your roster next year. And there's no guarantee these guys get better next year. They're all just going to be a year older, right? So that's something you have to take into consideration, where it keeps getting labeled. The time where players are available for you to bolster your roster and get better are at the trade deadline and in the offseason. Well, we just passed the trade deadline. So your next option to implement something on this roster would be in the offseason. And if you can't do that and the value's not really high enough, and then you're just, I would say, stuck with a Ty France or a Eugenio Suarez as they age another year next year, and you're not loving the production they bring out, then you're kind of screwed, right?
Sure, but again, if you're getting minor leaguers back for them, it still doesn't make any sense to trade them. It makes more sense to roll with the dice that those guys can continue to do something at the big league level to help the team. Also, I'm going to be honest about Gino. I know when our first half report cards came out, we gave him a bit of a hard grade because of how tough it had been for him offensively at the plate. He's still on pace for about a 2-win season. If he puts up a 2-win season at third base, that's still a valuable third baseman. It's not an all-star third baseman or the 4-win year he had last year, but it is something. He didn't lose the team games.
It is. I guess I'm in a wait and see moment with this, I will say. I think that's where I'm at.
Yeah. I just think if you're not going to get big league talent back for those guys, it's not worth it to deal them. And speaking of that, I'm not saying this was the Mariners' motive, but we have tied back to this very story many, many times over the last 6 months, and I think it's going to continue to be relevant. I'm not saying this was the Mariners' motive, but if you want to sales pitch Shohei Ohtani in the winter, and he just saw your team that was 3.5 games out of a wild card spot, hypothetically, trade Sewald, trade Teoscar, trade Gino, trade Ty France, is he really going to look at this place and say, man, those guys really want to win? Those guys that are just trading off big league talent left and right?
Is he going to say that for watching them trade Paul Sewald 3.5 games out of a wild card spot?
I think it's a little different to trade one reliever than if they trade 3 bats on top of it.
You're right. You're right about the bats, but it's not like anything they did at the deadline is selling Shohei Ohtani. Nothing they did on this deadline is doing that.
It's a net negative, or it's not it's a net
neutral.
zero, I should say.
It's
a net zero,
I would say.
However, if they had gone and traded all those bats, it does go into the negative.